Well, honestly, Gil, he was kind of a bad guy. He was an absolute charge and could fly real high. The normal people under him just groaned because he was just taking everything they owned. So they took to all their unpaved roads. They were scattered with all the old Gil's loads and screamed and yelled and beat their breasts. Gil looked out and knew he had to make some arrests. He looked at his assistant and said, "Where's my sword?" The assistant was too busy looking at a house he could not afford. The gods were starting to get all upset. They knew soon they'd have to make a threat. Their party was getting interrupted by the noise. They were still recovering from a night out with the boys. One of them stood up with an ice bag on his forehead. After he stumbled for a moment, he finally said, over the laughter and his own stuttering and slurring, "I've got an idea that's soul stirring." "Oh, I think we'll like this one," said his friend. "Quiet, you," did the god with the idea amend. "What we need to do is send someone in, Gil. Do you know of anyone who fits the bill?" A still struggling queen in the back started to stand and started saying a bunch of words that'd get her banned. "I could do it," she wanted to claim, because really she had absolutely no shame. So she changed tact and said, "I know a man." "I bet you know a lot of men," one said deadpan. She pretended not to notice, but the gods laughed, so loud that the still groggy god felt daft, that he'd spend his immortality with scraps, when he'd rather spend his time under the wraps. "Don't you know, E?" the queen began to proceed. She'd pitched something which they all agreed. One whiny god protested, "He's a bit of a wild card, and I wouldn't want E running around in my backyard. And isn't Gil a demigod anyway? I don't think for E it'd be easy prey." "Oh my, I didn't think I was surrounded by whiners," cried the queen, forgetting she was one of the worst hardliners. "I'll agree with anything to end my headache," said the first speaker, barely awake. The stamp of approval was given, and he was out, and there was something pouring out of his snout. He was the toughest beast in the middle of Asia. He had run all throughout the mountains of Caucasia. To set him loose was a scary proposition, because no one would ever stifle his ambition. When the people under Gil saw E coming, they'd really wished someone had invented plumbing, or at least had dug a pit in which they could hide. A deep one. Where to find them? You'd need a guide. Gil's assistant came in to give him the news, but Gil was already putting on his shoes. "I'll fight the bastard and send him to hell," even though he actually knew his father quite well. Gil forgot his sword, but was already out the door. That was fine, because Gil had been exercising his core. People gathered around to see the big showdown. Visitors came from all sides of town. Even that region usually smells like a landfill, because that time, that truck had that spill. He looked Gil in the eyes, and with a sigh, told him, "Gil, you're kind of a bad guy." So Gil threw his fist at the beast's teeth, and he just ducked to where he was beneath. The snarling wasn't just for effect, and Gil found himself on the ground decked. The crowd started cheering and banging drums, because they were sure they understood all outcomes. Of course, Gil got back up and made his move, and at this moment started getting into his groove. He found himself trapped in a headlock. The crowd knew it was a fatal choice to mock, and began to scatter into all their different directions. The priest from the casinos started demanding collections. A heckler stood at the side and shouted obscenities, and started to reveal all the criminals' identities. He let out an agitated squeal of pain, while Gil started to get out his chain. "You know I could kill you right now, and do anything that the fates don't allow. But I was looking for a pet, you see, something that isn't all gross and feathery. So I'm gonna take you home to be my pal. I'll build you a nice large corral." He thought about it like he had a choice, but there was something convincing in his voice. Sure, Gil would forget to feed him sometimes. I guess you could add it to his list of his crimes. But all in all, he was getting used to domestication, especially after he was subject to castration. Gil's assistant used to take him out on walks, but one time Hungry E called him up on the docks. and Gil had to train E to be a secretary and find a suit that went on a body so hairy. The gods all shook their heads in dismay. Their only idea had turned into child's play. "Oh, Gil, why can't we get you to comply?" The queen said. "Oh, Gil, he's kind of a bad guy." "I'm never drinking again," said the god who was quite ill. "At my age, it's no longer worth the thrill. But look, we have to do something about E. Something that even will make Gil flee. If any of you have any ideas, I'd love to hear 'em." The god of lunacy knew he had a gem and began to gather up all his papers and pens. He started, sorrow is the state of men's. But he was cut off and struck down where he stood. His crime being that he'd wasted so much wood, which back then was a crime that was instant death, because the god of laws had taken too much meth. "We've wasted so much time," said the queen. "Yes," said another, "my room isn't clean. I think I've really fixed it this time. Something that will really shift the whole paradigm." The rest all sat in silence and were intrigued, except the drinking again god, who was fatigued. "I know a man from heaven who's a bull. Gil will think he's quite a handful." Her audience just groaned and muttered. The drinking god between his swigs shuddered. "Okay, queen, try it, but this is goodbye. We'll let you do this, since Gil is kind of a bad guy." The guy who was a bull had a nice apartment. It was in a good neighborhood and by the fire department. He wouldn't step outside for less than $1,000, and yet he still managed to keep his back tan. "I really dislike people," he once claimed, and for this, he could not be blamed. Socially, he was a little immature. When he'd gotten his apartment, he forgot to read the brochure. So when the little messenger rang the bell, the bull man ripped him apart like a gazelle. But there was good money in this Gil and E job, and the bull felt he could use a kebab. After 3 wrong turns, Gil was found. Instead of a greeting, he was told he was hellbound. "Now come on, that's no correct conduct. Are you just here to obstruct?" The bull had forgotten his dictionary, so he was no longer able to provide any commentary. The two fought and hacked at each other. In another life, Gil could have been his brother. Not that reincarnation was present in his mind, because Gil plucked out his eyes, and now he was blind. The man with the nice apartment's battle cry. "Oh, Gil, you're at least, kind of, a bad guy." He stood in the back sharpening a knife. Maybe things had been different if he'd gotten a wife. He started hacking, cutting, and dividing. Gil made sure the whole thing was law-abiding. The casino priest nodded in concordance. He sorted out the pieces by importance. Gil regretted not setting up a postal service. He started getting a little nervous. As secretary and pet, he had a duty. There was nothing about which he could be snooty. So Edie the Queen had to travel on a bunch of roads that had no gravel. When he got there, they just stared. The Queen was confused as to why he dared. Maybe he now had a little bit of regret and wondered why he had taken on so much debt. He probably could have lived without the fancy shirts, or he could have saved money in spurts. The Queen finally decided to ask, "What's in the bag?" that was covered in diamonds and wrapped in a flag. "Oh, only your hopes, desires, and dreams." And both of them noticed it was tearing at the seams. "I guess now is the time for me to look inside. For E, this is quite a moment of pride." The Queen gave such a look of disgust at the whole experience, she just cussed. She didn't know she was so easy to mortify. She said, "Gil, you're kind of a bad guy." Neither E nor the Queen understood psychology, and they certainly wouldn't have passed a course in biology. So the Queen hypnotized E and drove him mad. She'd send him this way back to his comrade. All the while a god yelled, "Shut up, I'm sleeping. I'll never drink again, I promise," he added, weeping. E was a changed beast with a new disposition. Now his whole life was filled with contrition. Gil couldn't read his poems of death and woe, like a moody teenager who'd lost their beau. "Oh, just end it all," he insensitively teased, not knowing that his friend was now quite diseased. It can be hard to get it when you felt that way, when everything inside you feels a ray. Gil was at the top E at the bottom. He honestly wouldn't make it through the autumn, as the trees stripped down to nothing and were bare, and by all appearances didn't have a prayer. After all, the gods were too busy playing games to worry about anything that might soon go up in flames. When you can't crawl out of bed because of legs of lead, then you've experienced something beyond dread. Gil stood over him and his countenance fell. By now E had begun to smell. Invent the revolver, he said with a smile. I'll play a roulette game in style. I'm dabbling in self-destruction, while you're busy with reconstruction. Which was true, since Gil was busy with his tower. He wanted to show off his manpower. While the morning casino priests paid their calls, Gil stopped all of them in the halls, and told them that they were much too early. He's not dead yet, though his hair is curly. He tried to stand and with him communicate, but Gil couldn't stop looking at his gait. Oh Gil, I'm not sure how to classify you, except to say you're kind of a bad guy. At this point E began to bare his chest, and if you've been paying attention, you'd have guessed that E was at the end and ducked out of life, and that he found himself without all the strife. Gil stood there in confusion and disbelief, something that doesn't often happen to a chief. The first thing I've got to do is resign my post and give away everything. Well, okay, almost. I've got to go out on a journey to find myself. It doesn't matter if I find the ice shelf. Gil thought the earth was stretched like a sheet. He believed you could run around it if you were an athlete. So he set off on his impossible and improbable quest. The people, relieved of his rule, thought it was just a jest. They stayed in their huts and continued to sow, because they believed that Gil could never meet his death blow. But Gil was milking up some high mountain, like a loser looking for the youth fountain. What can you discover there but a collection of frozen remains of people who, to be very frank, lost their brains? Up and up he climbed without a care. He didn't pay attention to the clothes one would wear. Jutting out of the mountain he saw a hut. Surely, he thought, they won't keep their doors shut. Only now did he reflect on why he was here, and why he'd ventured in conditions so austere. Was he afraid of dying, or had he grown soft? Had his inner pain and screams grown too oft? The door creaked open and a face appeared. Gil just stood there staring at his beard. The man said, without a call you dropped by. You, sir, are kind of a bad guy. Gil really did ask this man if he'd heard of coffee beans. The man told him he hoped he didn't pass on his genes. Gil wanted to know this man's name. The man sighed and remained at the door frame. I guess you could really say I'm the best, but in all honesty you should call me Rest. May I come inside? Said the poor cold man. But Rest said he should hit him with a pan. I'm trying to be secretive and here you are. In a future time you'll call yourself Czar. Gil wondered how now he could take this title, but Rest interrupted by asking if this is vital. Gil told him he'd once heard a crazy story, but that he wasn't sure if he'd take it as allegory. Rest said he'd explain everything soon, but right now his actions were controlled by the moon. I don't believe in the directions of the satellites, deciding who exactly will become knights, but I'm willing to listen to some exaggeration if it'll give me a good sensation. Well, that's good, because I've got something for you, if you're willing to be born completely anew. I'll do anything, said Gil, just convert me. After all, he said, I'm nearly 30. Oh, the gods, said Rest, you're dying already. If you'll be careful, I'll try to keep you steady. Enough stalling, what can you possibly demonstrate? Oh, I've dealt enough with your hate, and the bottom of this lake is a perfect plant. If you think you can still it, you can't. It is a path you must take and earn. It is a lesson, after all, you must learn. But if I do it, Gil said, I'll be forever? Oh yes, you'll die absolutely never. You can't die, you're completely immortal. I have found humanity's secret portal. However, there's more to this narrative. To start from the beginning, it is imperative. Oh my gods, Gil sighed. Nothing is short today. Everything must turn into a very long essay. Once there was a lot of unclaimed valueless dirt, and one drunk god tried to assert there was worth if you turned it to people, and they would gladly build you a steeple. If you invent a crazy thing called religion, in which into every person you could pigeon. The rest of the gods couldn't help but agree, and one of them people even cultivated tea, which the gods greedily boiled and drank. and the different humans started pulling rank. Unfortunately for them, humans didn't come without a cost. The hungover parties tossed and tossed. All the while from below came screaming. So the lazy ones started scheming, and they brought to the queen a perfect plan. They devised in their eyes the fall of man. Have you, queen, ever heard of the idea of a flood? We'll cover the entire earth with their blood. And before you know it, the sleeping in will return. And with a nod, the queen let them adjourn. They killed almost everyone with this thought, and for all the terror that they wrought, there was crying and teeth chattering on the hill, even though it's bloodthirsty could not chill. So one came to me and said, hey, here's a boat. It is the best way to get around our moat. I took it with a bit of humility, because I always doubted my ability. How did I know I was to possibly survive? The God knew what would keep me alive. It is a secret plant under the lake. Come on, grab it. Your life's at stake. Wait, Gil said. My life is too good to die. Rest said, Gil, you're kind of a bad guy. Gil got from Rest some decent directions. He got to where he wouldn't need corrections. He descended and found his own path, avoiding all the gods and their wrath. For the most part, he continued uninterrupted, his whole way of being not yet corrupted. The cold and the wind wouldn't stop him. To him, strength was a synonym. When he found the lake, he dove deep, ready for the rewards he was to reap. Here comes the depth and water in the lungs, but he could taste it all on his tongue. When he found it, he plucked it, and found how easy it was to permit. When he placed it on the edge of the shore, the immortality had not been much of a chore. He started washing his hair that was all over, when something arrived to see if he was a pushover. A snake, a lizard, crawled along in the grass. I'd love to talk to you, snake, but I've got to get out of here by daybreak. Oh, but the world enjoys sleep. To keep on your journey would make you very cheap. Gil nodded his head and started to nap. To see a talking snake must make me madcap. The snake started to mystify and said, Gil, you're kind of a bad guy. While Gil's head was underwater, the snake committed a version of manslaughter. It took the plant and the queen chuckled. And when Gil realized it, his knees buckled, because everything he'd worked for was gone. The limits of his life had been drawn. At this moment he realized that he'd die, and he'd lost his chance to deify. So what could he do but go back home? Surely there was nowhere else to roam. The kingdom needs him to direct the world, as around the solar system it whirled. His inhabitants again felt terrorized, but the one who returned was who they despised. I'd like to tell you he had been reformed, and all this had made him informed, but for the most part he was the same. He was still trying to fight for a claim. His city was in ruins and despair. Gil wouldn't give up his share. He built a building to the sky, even though his enemies were all nearby. The casino priest started to make a shrine, while all the citizens got in the bread line. As he got older, Gil's body started to betray, and he had gotten more frightened every birthday. Life from him began to escape. His body was only held up by tape, and when the end was nigh, his grave would say, he was kind of a bad guy.